How about if I just start at the beginning? you could be honest.
Because you know what? They have the sweat equity that went into that memory that they're making with their friends and family. And that's what's important with us, and that's what the I Am Real World's about.
Well, that's a great question. You know, one of the best things about a spring food plot is you get a second chance if it fails.
Chasing Giants with Don Higgins, brought to you by buyafarm.com, your source for farm, recreational properties, rural homes, and more. By tapping into Don's years of experience, dedication, and commitment, Chasing Giants focuses on the techniques, strategies, and dedication needed to harvest one of God's most amazing creations, world-class whitetails. Now, here is Don and co-host Terry Peer.
Welcome to Chasing Giants, episode 28. This is Terry Peer. I got Don Higgins with me. It is August 21st, Don.
It's getting closer, Terry. It's almost time.
It is almost time. We usually are connected by phone, but tonight I'm actually in Illinois. So we're up here at the shop and sitting around doing this in person tonight.
Sitting just a few feet from each other, that's a little bit different, but We'll be doing a lot more of that as season comes along.
Yeah, as season comes along, I'm in town a whole lot more, and if I'm hunting here close to Don's, I can stay here, and he's got accommodations that are very nice for me when I'm in town. And if I'm staying about an hour east of here, he comes over every once in a while and has a good steak at the local steakhouse next to the hotel. So we usually can have time to hook up with each other. So we're closing in on the end of August. What's been going on with you?
I just continue to check trail cameras. I still got, a handful that I have not checked yet, but starting to get a pretty good handle on things and got some decent bucks spotted. And, it won't be long, about the 1st of September, I start shifting those cameras from the summer feeding areas to the fall rutting areas, actually. And, as those buck bachelor groups break up and the bucks relocate, or at least some of them relocate, I try to get those cameras moved. In fact, it's kind of a tradition for me that Labor Day weekend I usually spend moving trail cameras. And, we're only about 2 weeks away from Labor Day weekend, I think.
That's right.
So we're getting closer, but, as promised, this episode I'm going to give my buck forecast for this season. Did that the last 2 years on my blog, on my website, which I shared on social media, Facebook and that. And the last two have been very accurate. A lot of people don't realize it, but I run trail cameras over a pretty substantial area, 5 or 6 counties here in central Illinois where I live, but I've also got cameras on a property in Indiana and in Ohio on my property there. So, having 40, 50 trail cameras scattered out like that, you can get a pretty good idea, how one year compares to other years. And we're going to talk about that a little later. But how's your leg healing up?
Well, I'm actually quite a bit ahead of schedule. I've been hobbling around. We actually went to a farm today and pulled a card, and I actually walked out around the soybean food plot. I don't know how far of a walk that was, but it was flat ground, and I was able to do it. I was scheduled to be released to walk without crutches the early to mid-September, and I got released to do that last week and got released to drive this week. So that's why I came up here. I was getting the itch because I've been cooped up so long, so I jumped in the vehicle and drove up here. And so surgery, I'm probably 3 weeks ahead of schedule right now, so I still have to be extremely careful with walking on unlevel ground and doing stuff, getting up and down off of like you got a ton truck, an F-350, and I got to work and be really, really careful about getting in and out of it. But I'm ahead of schedule of where I need to be.
Well, I knew you was hard-headed enough that by the time the Kentucky season opened, you was going to find a way to be in the woods, so I'm not a bit surprised.
It was funny. I was in therapy on Tuesday this week, and at the end of therapy, the physical therapist looked at me and said that I had enough strength in my quadricep that she goes, I think we finally gotten to where you can drive, because every time I go in there, I ask them when I can drive. And that was right at the end. And I said, oh, that's fantastic. Can't wait to share the news. And so she walked me out to the door. Because of COVID, we have to walk out a different door for an exit. And my car was parked right in front of the door, and I got in the driver's seat, and she figured out that I'd already driven to therapy that day. So,
yeah.
But no, I really appreciate all the comments and support from everybody. It's definitely a tough road. It's a grueling therapy to get through, but I'll be ready to hunt here in 2 weeks. There's no doubt about it.
Well, hopefully it don't take you long to fill your tag, and by October 1st you're hunting in Illinois.
Yeah, that's the plan.
Yep.
So I came up actually yesterday, and I said after I got hurt and we started talking and trying to figure out how all this was going to work out, that the Quiet Cat was going to be a blessing. And believe it or not, I rode the Quiet Cat yesterday and checked all the trail cameras on the farms that myself and a friend Patrick hunt. I rode that thing 3.5 miles yesterday around river bottom farms and big soybean fields, and it's not what that piece of equipment is made to do. It's made to pedal with an electric assist, but I was able to just throw my leg up over it, set on the seat, and not pedal, and just use the electric all the way around the fields. And I wouldn't have been able to do that yesterday without that. So I just put it in second gear. I got the single speed version, so I put it in second gear and just putted around about 7-8 miles an hour, and took my time and made sure I didn't run into the levee or something and wreck. But yeah, it was definitely a real blessing to have it to run around on here the last couple of days.
Well, those things may be made with a pedal assist, but I can tell you this old fart has pedaled about 3 times since I've had mine.
We were actually driving around tonight right before the sun went down, and you were showing me the actual field you talk about, where you drive it through the soybean field. I forget how far you said it was even across that field, but
it's a 1/2 mile long field, and then I go a 1/4 mile across the end of it. And, what amazes me is those soybeans are up so tall that they're hitting my hands on the handlebars. And yet on those 30-inch rows, you don't come out of there with a leaf on you. I mean, you don't tear up a thing. And there's just no other machine you could do that with. And that electric bike just goes right down those 30-inch rows. And, yeah, the beans are rubbing on your legs on both sides and hitting your hands, but you're not hurting those plants whatsoever.
Right.
And
well, you wouldn't have been able to even check that camera without it. I mean, you're not walking that far out across that bean field. So maybe when you were younger.
Yeah. Not anymore. Not anymore.
Right. So, but yeah, it really came in handy. I actually have to go to, on the way back to Kentucky, the next 2 days, I have work obligations around the Indy 500. So I actually laid it down in the back of my SUV on the seat instead of using the rear carrier, because I'm going to have to stay in a hotel one night, Saturday night in Indy. So I didn't know how that was going to work with me having it out on the bike rack. But even by myself throwing it up in the back of the SUV, it's been pretty easy. But I checked all the cameras. I found 3 potential shooters this week.
Yeah, you showed me that picture. You had 3 shooters in one picture.
In one frame.
Yeah.
So, obviously there's going to be a lot of shifting going on in bachelor groups. When you got potential of 3 potential whoppers, kind of get you a little bit more motivated and excited. That was the first card pull we've done in Illinois this year. Because I got hurt, we didn't have cameras out this early. So something to look forward to.
Yeah. Well, how's your cell cam test going?
Well, the cell camera test is going all right. The idiots on social media that keep you got me wound up, and we're only 9 minutes in. I mean, it is what it is. I don't know why I didn't expect any more, but the purpose of my test was to take the lower price point cameras that everybody on social media is raving about, that I had no familiarity with, and test them. And I guess to begin with, I'm biased anyway, because I still believe And it's not a paid endorsement. I mean, we've gotten on here and talked bad about them, but I still believe the Reconyx is the best camera out there as far as taking quality pictures, trigger speed. But I understand that the price point of that camera is so high that a lot of people can't do it. But my goal in this test, there's a place for every one of these cameras with different consumers. What I just wanted to do is say, this camera has this bookends of capability. Know what you're spending the money for, because these pro staff peoples get out and says, oh, this is the best camera ever. Well, this is the best camera. Nobody's ever ran them side by side. And that was my only goal with this. I'll be honest with you. I don't think that these 6 that I'm testing right now, I'm going to be able to say which one's the best, because the one that is the best is the one that's still working 3 years from now. Mm-hmm. And we're not going to be able to wait that long before people want conclusions. So there's been some obvious things that I like and don't like about these cameras, but you got to realize the lowest price point camera is that Tacticam Reveal at $100, and the high point is about $325, $350. So you're getting different things for what you pay for. You know, one of the things that I have learned through studying up on how to test is this misconception that megapixels that they advertise on the outside of the box doesn't mean clearer pictures. And I think I really encourage people to not fall for that trap. It's almost back to like what people do with real world, saying they're a better quality seed, but when you look at the seed tag, it's all inoculant or seed coating. Mm-hmm. You know, what it really comes down to is the sensor on that lens. And, you know, a high-end sensor is a 5 megapixel sensor. And like, for instance, the Stealth Cam, they're advertising over 20 megapixels. Well, you're not even getting close to that to the file that gets sent to you. And there's a lot of good stuff out there that's even, you know, that I'm not smart enough to figure out. But people got to realize when you get up in those real high level size files, all they're really doing is they're layering the same pixel over the top of each other. So if you go and talk to even like the guys at Exodus or Browning, they're telling you to back the quality down setting on the camera, you know, to 5 megapixels, 6 megapixel, and you'll actually have clearer pictures because you're closer and you're not layering those pixels on top of each other, and that comes in play at night. So if anybody's got any questions, I've found a lot of research on, it's not the size of the file, it's the quality of the sensor on that lens that really sets those cameras apart. But unfortunately, you can't really advertise that on the back of a box because the average consumer won't understand it. It's really hard to tell that story. So the gimmick in the marketing on the cell cameras is to say 18 megapixel, 20 megapixel. So you lay a 2 megapixel and a 12 or 16 megapixel picture together, they'll probably be the same clarity. So if anybody's got any questions about that, you can send me a private message on social media, and I'll forward you the links to some of the stuff I found. The other thing that I've noticed is the construction of these cheaper built cameras. I don't want to be biased this early, but I come from a manufacturing background, and the quality of these things aren't going to last. And people have to understand that. You know, right now I'm getting really good pictures from a couple of the ones that I'm surprised at, but I'll be really surprised if they last a long time. And for some consumers, that's okay. You know, they'll use them for a year or two and buy another one versus buy a $400 to $600 camera. But part of this test is understanding that. I can tell you that I took a lot of heat from a couple individuals because, heaven forbid, I used a zip tie, to mount a camera to a T-post. And the only reason I did it is we have a long, narrow alfalfa field that I could space these cameras 18, 20 yards apart. Because if we stack night pictures on top of each other, that IR flash interferes with each other. So one of those cameras is getting the short end of the stick, right? It's either going to trigger at the wrong time or be blurry. So I was able to take one alfalfa field that the deer walk all the way across, all face the same direction, have the exact same weather, same conditions, but it's a high tensile electric fence. So guess what? I used a wire tie, and people are idiots. They got offended because, heaven forbid, I used a wire tie, which is an unconventional way to fasten a trail camera to something as part of the test.
I guess I missed that one. What's wrong with
I don't know.
I mean, I'm always trying to learn more. Why would they be opposed to?
It's not the right way, Don. They've never heard of that. And I mean, every redneck in the world knows a wire tie and duct tape, you can fix anything. So, but anyway, I mean, one of the cameras what started it is, I think this guy's favorite camera that he used, I put a wire tie through it by hand, and when I pulled to tighten it, it actually broke the back of the case where the strap usually goes. So I mentioned it in part of the review is this is something that I'm concerned about, because guess what? Your cable lock goes through the back same area. So what that tells me is if somebody wanted to steal your camera, it's just a good tug and the back half of the case breaks off. Mm-hmm. But I offended people because I'm using wire ties to test the trail camera.
Well, you hang around me, you're going to offend a lot more people before you're done.
So, I mean, right now, I think the higher price cameras, the Eye, the Browning, and the Exodus are probably taking a little bit clearer pictures, but, I'm in no way ready to, start drawing conclusions. And my conclusions aren't, again, they're not going to be which one's the best. It's to help people understand, what are you getting for this price point? Mm-hmm. And like with a stealth cam, for example, you're not getting 22 megapixel clear pictures to your phone. You're getting pictures that are accustomed to $100 cell camera to your phone. And people just have to understand that. So that's the goal of the test.
Well, one thing that I've noticed on these trail camera posts, if you will, everybody's got a favorite, and every brand has fans. Mm-hmm. And from my experience, those cheaper cameras are not consistent. In other words, you can get one of those cheaper cameras and it'll work fantastic out of the box, and the next one is junk out of the box. Right. And there's just not consistency in the manufacturing or whatever. So I think, and the other thing that I've noticed is that some consumers, I think, as long as they take the camera out of the package and it works and it takes a picture, they think, man, this thing's great. It's working. They don't realize what they've missed, how many pictures they've missed. Right. And until you hang a camera next to a good camera, you really don't know. I mean, you may go out and you have 300 pictures in 4 days and you think, wow, this thing's working fantastic. But you set another really good camera next to it, and it might have 1,000 pictures in that same time. And like I said, people have different objectives, but we were talking tonight about a specific buck that we're not talking about a whole lot yet, but it is a buck that we're watching. He doesn't like trail cameras, right? So you might get 1 or 2 chances at this. Yep. And if you don't have a camera that's going to give you what you need in that reliability. So, and then part of the other thing I'm looking at is customer service. Mm-hmm. And, and for all the listeners out there that heard on the podcast before where Don and I both vented about Reconyx cameras, I will give them credit. They reached out to us and explained, where, I don't know if you want to call it a misunderstanding or their explanation for the way things were. They have reached out to us and tried to rectify it and tried to do that. So that's good on them. I think we still had a legitimate concern with it, but and then I've actually used 3 of the 6 cameras customer service already, so that's good and bad that they were able to help with customer service. But if I'm already calling them less than a week in trying to figure something out or fix something, but that's what they're there for is for customer service. So the interesting one though that we've talked a little bit about that kind of has me a little bit of wondering is this Eye, which wasn't a company that I was personally familiar with. A friend of mine recommended it to me, but that camera actually feeds pictures into a software management tool very similar to, I think, what was the name of that one that we looked at that one time, Deercast or something like that. But basically all your pictures get stored with data, wind direction, barometric pressure, time, and you can run reports inside of this whole thing. I do think that's one extra step in this price point of cameras that company does offer that I'm intrigued about and to continue to learn. So for those of you who have followed it on my social media, basically this weekend I've moved all 6 of those cameras
from Kentucky to Illinois, and they're all on a 300-acre piece of property here in Illinois to start seeing what I see here in more traditional conditions instead of watching a 15-acre alfalfa field. You know, I've put them more in places that I need them. So,
well, it'll be interesting to hear your feedback on each podcast here for a while to
see which
get your
other
opinion.
To see which other social media troll that's complaining about wire ties and there's people still complaining because there's a brand out there that I didn't put in the test.
Yeah.
But I paid for all the cameras. It wasn't like I called all these companies and said, send me a free camera so I can line them up beside each other.
Something I've learned over the years, Terry, is that, 95+% of the people on the internet are great people. And you just got to ignore about, less than 5%.
Right.
It's less than 1 out of 20. It's probably like 2%. They're either jealous or they've just got some kind of issue, and every once in a while they'll catch me on a bad day and I'll rip into one of them. But for the most part, I just either block them from my page or whatever. But
there has been a lot of people reach out and say they appreciate me doing it, because the bottom line is I bought 6 cameras of my own money trying to help people that listen to this podcast, whereas I could have spent the same amount of money and went and bought 3 or 4 or 3 Reconics, which is what I probably should have done for my own personal benefit. But, I'm trying to help everybody else, and people have been supportive of that. But, if it wasn't for people, it'd be fun.
Well, it's fun anyway, and you just got to think of all the good people that, listen to our podcast. I mean, the downloads each episode just keep growing, and especially the last one.
They must have liked my rant last time, because good grief, we got a ton of feedback, and the downloads were crazy on that episode.
Well, I think the first 4 days we had 2.5 times as many downloads as what we typically have in the first week. So I mean, more than double in about half the time. So we're on the right track, and we appreciate those good folks that do listen and submit questions and support us and allow us to do this. So we can't let a couple bad apples ruin the whole thing. So.
They probably all hunt in tree saddles.
I'm not even going there.
I tried to tee one up for you tonight, and we're not even going to bite on that one. So Don's trying to be good, everybody. He's not biting tonight.
Nope. You've opened a can of worms, and I can't let it go. The interesting thing that happened to me since the last podcast was I was on a particular page on social media that's full of these saddle hunters, and there was a meme on there, and all I did was copy the meme and share it on my page. Well, the crazy thing was it was fine on that other page. All these love saddle guys were standing around holding hands, singing "Kumbaya." This is great. I posted on my page, and they flip out and go berserk.
It was like 110 comments within the first couple hours or something.
It was crazy, but it even made a couple of them mad. They quit following me and whatever, but
it's just all in good fun.
Yeah.
If somebody can complain about me putting a wire tie or a zip tie through the camera on a T-post, good grief, we can poke a little fun at saddle hunting for.
And it's not like we really care. I mean,
it's all in good fun. And it was really just started as a way to pick on Wes.
Yeah, that's what is really the funny part, is it was an inside joke with us and Wes, and it kind of snowballed from there, and a lot of people got their panties in a wad, and now they think we're anti love swing or whatever you want to call it, love saddle, tree saddle. And really, we don't care at all.
No, to each their own. I'm happy for you. So...
Anyway, we better move on to something else.
I'm done.
Well, my buck forecast.
There we go. That's the meat and potatoes of this episode. We wanna hear what you got here.
Well, as I mentioned earlier, I've done this. This will be the 3rd year, and basically I've been running trail cameras. A lot of trail cameras on a lot of different properties for many years now, and. A couple of years ago, I got the idea, and I don't remember if things looked really bleak that first year or really good. I think they looked really good.
The first year was really good.
And because
the second year was the one you were worried about EHD.
There you go. All them bucks disappeared.
Yep.
But the first year, that I wrote the blog, I'd noticed that summer that there was just more, bucks, let's say over 150 inches than I was typically seeing in an average year. Significantly more. And I wrote that blog, and I predicted that was going to be a banner year, that a lot of guys were going to kill the biggest buck of their life that year. And I can't tell you how many responses I had, and people texting me or sending private messages or even commenting that it was spot on. And, even like late in the rut, you get around Thanksgiving time, those guys were saying, I seen your buck forecast last summer, and I didn't know what to think of it. But after spending, my whole vacation and, we're 2 months into the season, I think you were spot on. And then the next year, there was several mature bucks that I knew had survived the previous season, but I couldn't find them that summer. I knew they survived and shed antlers, and I was still getting their pictures after season closed. And I would go to the places where I was getting those same bucks pictures in previous summers, like I typically do, and a lot of them disappeared. On a typical year, you might have one disappear, maybe two, but I'm talking like 8 or 10 of these big bucks disappeared and were never seen again. And I wasn't sure what happened, and I predicted, I said that on there, and lo and behold, I get all kinds of comments back. You're right. We had these 3 bucks that we'd been watching and can't find any of them. We don't know what happened to them. They weren't where they usually are in the summer. So those last 2 forecasts were pretty accurate, I think.
You're already better than the weatherman.
Well, the weatherman, he's only got to be right about half the time.
See, you're batting 2 for 2 already, so you're already ahead of him.
Yeah, well, today I'm not going out on a limb near as much as I did the last 2 years, because from what I've seen so far this summer, and things look good. Don't get me wrong, they look good, but I think this is only going to be slightly above average. I don't think it's a super year. I know of a lot of bucks that did not add much horn growth, mature bucks, and I know some bucks that had significant non-typical characteristics in the past that are cleaner this year, more typical. And I'm not just talking 1 or 2 bucks, but several. But there's also some really nice bucks out there too. I think this year is going to be just a slight bit above average as far as mature bucks, or the size of bucks we can expect. There's a great crop of bucks. Bucks over 140 inches. It's a good year for those. I call them mid-range bucks. Say bucks that are going to score from about 140 to 170.
Right.
There's a lot of those deer out there. Get over 170, and there's some of them out there too. There's some really good bucks out there, but I just don't see the bucks that I've been watching for multiple years, and there's a lot of them. It's just not like I'm watching 3 or 4 bucks. I just don't see any of them. None of them have made significant jumps in antler score. None of them.
So I guess from your experience as a hunter and a captive farmer, is that a result of weather, nutrition? Is there anything that we can correlate with that, or is it just how it ends up happening when we see people have to understand the sample size of the bucks you're looking at isn't your home farm and 10 bucks. This is across 3 states and a ton, and we haven't talked about this before right now with the listeners on there, and I have 2 bucks on my farm in Kentucky that aren't, I guarantee you, they're not 1 inch bigger than they were last year. Mm-hmm. So I think it holds water, but is there any correlation and why?
Well, that's a very interesting question, a great question, because early in the spring, I wrote a blog, and you can go to my website right now. It's on there, and I think the title of it was something like, "Is 2020 setting up to be a super year for bucks?" or something like that. Anyway, back in early April, it looked like we were going to have an early spring. I'm talking like about the first week or so of April. The weather broke. A lot of the farmers got their fields planted, and I was seeing deer out in those fields, bucks with just the start of antler growth. And I thought, this is exactly what we need to grow big deer. And then that good weather only lasted about a week or so, and then boom, it went right back to almost winter weather. And for a month,
cold and wet.
Yep, exactly, and it drug on well into May. And I can tell you from the captive deer side of things that that hot weather actually is good for antler growth, because that velvet antler is full of blood vessels. And those blood vessels are carrying nutrients to that growing antler. And in hot weather, those blood vessels expand, and they're bigger. They're carrying more blood and thus more nutrients to that growing antler. In cold weather, they constrict, and they don't carry as many nutrients.
Not to mention the row crops are delayed.
Yep.
Because the farmers that did plant probably got flooded or rotted out in the field with bad germ, and they were even delayed, so the food sources were even pushed out.
That's another fantastic point, because the farmer that farms my field planted my soybeans during that short stretch in early April. And I've never seen soybeans take so long to come out of the ground. I'm telling you what, those soybeans took 4 weeks to pop out of the ground. I would have swore those things would have rotted in the ground. But they'd been treated with a fungicide like we do the real world beans. And by golly, them things came up, every one of them. But the great point you make, Terry, is it was delayed by a month. So that month when things went back to getting cold, those deer did not have a prime food source to feed on. And they also had that colder weather constricting their blood flow in that growing antler. And that very well may have had something to do with it. But, something that we need to throw out here as well is that the weather across the Midwest was really spotty this year. I mean, we had, where I'm at, we had fantastic rainfall throughout the entire summer.
Right.
But then there was areas, and I seen a drought map. There was an area in Iowa where there was significant drought. And
Kansas too, right?
Yeah, and I talked to guys out that way, and we're in the middle of a drought, and I'm like, you got to be crazy. We got 6 inches of rain last week.
Right.
We've got rain just about every week all summer.
Yeah, and I know there's pockets of the country that if you looked at year-to-date rainfall, it doesn't look bad, but when they got 10 inches in a matter of a week and a half and then it's been dry ever since, that's not good either.
Right.
But on paper, it might look like they've had decent rain.
But those drought areas, that's definitely going to impact antler growth. So, I'm saying from the areas that I've observed, it looks to be slightly above average in terms of that. There's no doubt in my mind there's going to be pockets where the antler growth is less than average, and it's kind of regional.
Right.
So
the other thing that we haven't talked about much on the podcast is EHD. Have you heard of any outbreaks of EHD anywhere this year?
I have not heard of any EHD yet, but
we need to find a wood to knock on. But
right, for sure. I did find
because wet and then dry, that's usually not a good sign.
Right, as that water recedes, there's a lot of mud for those midge gnats. But the thing of it is, there's still plenty of water sources, so those deer are spread out. They're not congregated on a restricted water source. All the creeks around here are flowing, and so the deer are not congregated like they typically are in a drought. But I did find a dead fawn this week along the creek on my property. I was doing some work, and I noticed these buzzards, that just were down in the brush and stuff, and I thought, well, there's something dead there, and I wanted to see what it was, and it was a fawn.
Right.
I have no idea what killed it, but being along that creek makes me a little concerned.
Sure.
I'm not super concerned, but if I find another one, I'll be concerned.
Well, I know yesterday when I took the bike down over the hill onto the river bottom, when I got down to the bottom, I looked over and saw 30 buzzards circling, and I mean my stomach just started turning in knots because I thought, oh no, here we go again. But as I went around the corner, I'd realized that they had rolled hay down there. So, I'm
probably hit a rabbit or something.
Rabbit, snakes, and maybe a fawn, I don't know, but at least there was an explanation for it. But when do you think we're out of the woods on EHD talk? Into September, maybe?
Well, really
Frost?
The first frost, but this sure doesn't appear to be a bad year for it, because, we're here at the end of August, and usually by this time you're hearing about it.
Right.
So it doesn't look to be. I mean, there's probably going to be some isolated outbreaks here and there, but it's not going to be widespread, I don't believe, like we've seen in past.
So 2 years ago, you've in your forecast, you flat out said that there is going to be some absolute giants killed. I still think there's probably going to be some very good bucks killed, but overall, probably just average is where you're going.
Yeah, there's always going to be giants.
That year you called it, it seemed like everywhere somebody was killing just a toad.
Every year there's going to be some, but, I just see this as being an average year. There's going to be pockets where there's a lot of good bucks. I think we're probably in one of the better pockets in the whole Midwest right here as far as the weather we got.
Yeah. I
know there's places that are not as good. So
maybe our listeners can, when the podcast is uploaded on you're obviously it's on podcast, all of the different services out there like Apple Podcast and iHeartRadio and everything. But when you post it on Higgins Outdoors YouTube, maybe our listeners can kind of comment on what they've seen.
Right.
Because like I said, I didn't even know what you were going to say tonight, but I'm sitting here thinking about it. The 2 shooter bucks that is on my farm in Kentucky are the exact same size they were last year.
Mm-hmm.
There just isn't a lot. There was no growth. So
I've seen that a lot. There was one particular 3-year-old buck that I had my eye on that I thought had the potential to be a giant. And I think the deer was probably as big at 3 years old as he is this year at 4 years old.
Interesting.
He's within less than 5 inches of either way of what he was last year. And, I was hoping that he had a big jump in him. A lot of other bucks that I can think of that, had non-typical stickers and things that smoothed up, and now they're just clean typicals. And not only bucks on my cameras, but I'm talking about bucks that friends have showed me. Here he was last year, and I was expecting more out of him. Here he is this year, and didn't really put on anything.
So stupid question. So if we look at, say, the delayed spring, the delayed crops, not getting the blood flow, the genetics in that deer to have the non-typical points might still be there. It's just it didn't have the season of growth before the antlers hardened and they shed, before you started seeing the flyers and the kickers and all the trash and different things. But if you find that shed, you might see the little nub of where maybe something was starting. It just didn't have the time to develop it, just like beans don't have the time to maybe get as tall before they start maturing and putting on pods. Is that a...
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
The genetics are what they are, and just because they didn't have the growing conditions this year doesn't mean that next year they might come back and have more non-typical points than they had the year before. So genetics being what they are, nutrition is often what limits genetics, the genetic potential. A buck may have the genetic potential to be 200 inches, but his nutrition intake may limit him to be a 180-inch deer. His genetics, may allow him the opportunity to have, 6 or 8 extra non-typical points, but the nutrition is just not there for those points to develop.
So the interesting study that could be done is, we've talked about fetal programming, is in 5 years, what's our 5-year-olds look like? Because this year, those does in a very pivotal time when they're pregnant with those does we're not getting the nutrients they needed at the right time, or it was delayed a little bit. It'd be almost an impossible study.
Mm-hmm.
But it's almost like put that in the back of your mind, and what do the fawns that were born this year, when we start looking at them at 3 years old, do we see something different?
Well, that's a good point, because it's that cold spell that we talked about that happened in April and went well into May. That's the third trimester, the last part of the pregnancy. That's when the nutrients are the most critical. Any cattle farmer is going to tell you that last trimester is when that calf does the most growing, and that's when nutrition is the most important. And this year it was lacking because of that late spring. Something interesting I'll throw out just from my knowledge of captive deer industry. There's guys that raise captive bucks that, when those bucks are growing their antlers and when they're in velvet, they'll have those bucks in pens where there's absolutely no shade. They don't want those bucks to be shaded. They want those bucks.
Really?
Yeah, they want them bucks out there, so that those antlers are out in the sun warming up, and it's, not dilating those blood vessels and increasing the blood flow.
Well, it's the same as what my physical therapy is telling me about my knee. Even though I swell and I get really, really sore and ice makes it feel better, I'm limited on how much I can ice because they want that blood flow going through where they put the new ACL in to heal faster. And if I just sit on an ice machine all day long, I'm slowing that process down. So almost the same common thread there.
Yep. Get those antlers out there where they're heated up by the sun and increases the blood flow, which increases the nutrient delivery to that growing antler.
Okay. Buck forecast.
Yep.
There's still hope, though.
Yeah, and I hope somebody don't say, well, he just kind of passed the buck because he said average. Well, I'm seeing slightly above average here, but I know that there's going to be areas also below average, and it is what it is.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see if people start commenting. We'll obviously share the podcast on our social media, and then it'll be uploaded on YouTube here shortly. But comment below and tell us what you've seen from the bucks that you can identify from last year. Are they bigger, about the same, or if you've seen kind of the same thing that Don has?
Yep.
Be a kind of an interesting feedback from all of our listeners.
Yeah, I'd love to hear the comments. I'm sure they're going to be all over the board based on, limited observations. My observations are limited too. This is far from a scientific conclusion. It's just, my observation based on my experience on a limited number of properties, although it's probably more properties than the average hunter gets to see bucks from.
Sure. So, all right. Well, you got anything else before we go into the BioFarm segment?
I think that pretty much covers it, Terry.
All right. We're going to go to the BioFarm.com property of the week.
BuyAFarm.com is your source for farm, recreational properties, rural homes, and more. Now, here is Don Higgins with this week's featured property.
All right, this week's featured property is 65 acres in Shelby County, Illinois. Shelby County is an area where it is very difficult to find recreational properties. And the reason for it is Lake Shelbyville is a major tourist attraction. It's an 11,000-acre lake run by the Army Corps of Engineers. It draws people from all over the country, especially a lot of people out of the Chicago area. And these folks have come in and they've bought smaller properties around the county and in the area, and put up summer homes, and some have even retired around here. So finding a property in Shelby County is very difficult. But this 65 acres includes about 50 or so tillable acres, which could be enrolled in CRP or something like that. The taxes on the whole place is only $701, so it's very reasonable. There's whitetail and turkey on the property right now, but the thing about this property is the potential that it has to be used so many different ways. You could keep that 50 acres tillable and have income from that 50. You could put it in CRP and have income. You could develop it into a hunting property. You could divide it with a friend, and make it a vacation home, because it's only a few miles, probably less than 5 miles from Lake Shelbyville, and all the tourist activities there with the lake and everything. So the big thing I see about this property is its location in Shelby County. I can tell you, I live in Shelby County, and recreation properties in Shelby County just do not come along very often, and this is one. If you have any interest, you go to the BuyAFarm.com website and look for the 65 acres in Shelby County. It's probably the only listing in Shelby County, actually. But anyway, the agent that has this property listed is Danny Barker, and Danny's phone number is 217-827-5266. And you tell Danny that you heard about it on Chasing Giants, and he'd be glad to show it to you. But again, recreation properties in Shelby County are hard to come by, and there's a lot more to do in Shelby County than just play on your own 65 acres. You got 11,000-acre lake that you can fish, boat, there's public hunting all around that lake, so plenty of things you can do.
Yeah. So for the out-of-state people that don't know exactly where Shelby County is, how would you describe it as far as relationship to bigger towns?
Yeah, it's less than it's probably about maybe 40 minutes at the most from Decatur. It's probably about a little more than an hour from Champaign. We're about 3 hours or so south of Chicago.
So yeah.
St. Louis, we're about two hours, probably less than 2 hours, probably about an hour and 40 minutes or so from
Right.
St. Louis.
So
Yep.
for the people that's looking for something that gives you a basic geographic location of where it's at, and
Yep.
the key in some of these properties is it's an investment that sometimes is hard to make, but if you can recoup with some income by with that tillable ground, whether it's CRP or row crop leasing it out, at least you can help subsidize that payment a little bit.
And that's a great point, Terry. I see these guys. Just today we was talking about leases, and all the guys that are contacting us. And do you know any place to lease? Do you know any place to lease? We could make a living leasing ground if we had the ground, but the ground just isn't available. But you take a piece like this, and people think that I can't afford to buy a piece of ground. Well, you need to consider the income you're going to get off that ground. If you put that towards the payment, then that really knocks down what you got to come up with.
Right.
And I think more people could afford ground than what they really think.
Right. And you can borrow money right now too. That's the nice thing is we're
Low
not
interest.
We're not in a situation with our economy at this point anyway where you can't borrow money for something. So well, alrighty. Go to buyfarm.com and look at this property in Shelby County, Illinois. We want to thank Buyfarm to be in our feature sponsor. They support us a lot and obviously offer a lot of land solutions for families and people looking and wanting to sell. So we appreciate their help.
Absolutely.
So what do we got next?
Submitted questions. We
All
got just 2 this week.
I'm glad you only picked 2 because we're a little bit behind schedule of what our normal is, so we'll end up probably about the same spot unless something about wire ties comes back up.
Well, I figured you was going to go on a rant and tie up some time, so I only picked 2 questions this week instead of 3. So. But the first question that we have this week is submitted by Natalie Hesselberg from Saline, Michigan. Natalie says, my question is about logging my property. My property is 118 acres located in southern Michigan and about 80 acres of timber consisting mostly of mature walnuts, maples, and some oaks. I have heard so many different ways to log a property I'm not sure what to do. I would like to make some income off of logging now and in the future, but I mostly want to log it to improve the wildlife habitat. I've heard of select cut and clear cut and doing the whole property or in a section of half or quarter of the property and then come back in a few years and do the other sections that didn't get logged. I do not think the property has been logged in a very long time because I do not see any old stumps anywhere. What do you recommend, and does your consulting service make recommendations about logging? I absolutely make recommendations about logging when I look at a property. And your other question, what do I recommend, is kind of, it depends on the property. And I'm just going to go by the information that I have here to look at, that you've got about 80 acres of timber on this 118-inch property. So personally, what I would do is I would log half of that 80 acres. And I would have a logger come in and I would have him cut it hard. And now that doesn't mean that he cuts, 12-inch trees, but any tree that's got decent value, I would have him cut it, and log it and take it. And then as soon as that logger is done, I would try to have this done in the winter right after hunting season. And then as soon as that logger is done taking the logs out that he wants, I would go in, and it's probably going to take several days, and if you can round up some help, that'd be even better. But then I would go in, and I would cut any tree left that is never going to have timber or wildlife value. So you don't want to cut the young oaks and walnuts and things like that are going to have value in the future.
Talking about like locust trees and
exactly.
stuff like that.
So soft maples, hackberries, locust, box elder. There's just a ton of different trees, and I would just cut them out, and it's doing a very aggressive timber stand improvement. And you're going to do a number of things by doing such. First of all, the trees that you are leaving, you're clearing the competition for those trees to grow at a faster rate and give you another timber crop down the road. The other thing you're going to do, you're going to put a lot of cover on the ground. You drop those trees, and there's going to be a lot of cover on the ground. And people say, well, why don't you hinge cut them? And you could, but why I don't like hinge cutting in this situation anyway is that if that tree is worthless, why keep it alive? If it's so, worthless that you're going to cut it, why don't you just kill it instead of having that root system still alive, competing with better trees? People say, well, when you hinge cut it, that tree's still alive and it's producing browse. The deer can browse on those branches. Yeah, you're right. But if you drop it, a lot of browse species are going to grow up and through that dead treetop. And that treetop laying on the ground can really protect, like young oaks that are sprouting and growing up. If it's growing up through a treetop, it's a whole lot more or less likely to get browsed by a deer and result in a good timber tree years down the road. So I would do that heavy timber or heavy TSI cut after timbering on half of that property, and then I would wait at least about 10 years and then come in and do the other half of the property. And the reason for that is you don't want the entire timber to mature up at one time. You want to diversify a little bit. And 10 years is probably on the short side. I'd wait at least 10 years, maybe more like 15 to 20. But that's going to give you at least 40 acres of really heavy cover, which will be great bedding cover for the deer. And then before that timber matures and canopy's over and everything, you're going to come in and you're going to do the other 40. And it's going to be coming along, a decade or so behind the other. But just based on the information I'm giving here, that is a general suggestion. Now, when I go look at a property as a consultant, it's going to be a whole lot more specific and detailed.
Actually helping choose the trees and everything like that as far as the long-term plan.
Yeah, I'm not marking the timber per se, but it's going to be a very specific plan, like I'm drawing the line, and there's been properties where I've had staggered logging areas. There may be 4 or 5 different areas on a property to be cut over time instead of the 2 like we're recommending here.
But seeing the property and seeing where bedding and food sources are, you can help identify areas that instead of just, it's not say the left 40 and the right 40, it's the right and the wrong 40 basically. It's how do you divide it up to do a long-term plan?
It's just hard to get specific when all I've got to go on is one little paragraph here describing the place. When I visit, it'll be a detailed suggestion on how to go about logging a property.
Yeah, I got 2 follow-up questions to that question, if I can ask you.
You sure can.
Is it just my area that I come from in Kentucky, or is it everywhere? But it seems like to me everybody that I know that's had their property logged in the last 8-9 years, it's been a horrible experience. If they don't have somebody that they trust and loggers coming in and doing what wasn't in the plan, or maybe going not within the original parameters, it seems like there's more bad experiences with those situations than good, at least in my area. And I don't know if that's common everywhere, or it's just there's not a specific set plan going in where somebody's truly helped put a plan together and just say, okay, I want to log half of it.
I don't think it's just your area, Terry. Loggers have a reputation just about everywhere that I've worked for being a little bit on the shady side, shall we say. But that does not mean there's not good loggers out there. Right. And I got some good loggers that I recommend. I don't have a good logger for every, state that I consult in. But
I was going more along the lines, not saying they're shady. I'm just saying there isn't someone almost project managing the thing versus coming up with a true plan, having somebody that can help you make decisions to inform the logger. This is exactly what I want in the areas I want versus this hillside or that oak flat.
Well, I think a lot of this does fall back on the landowner, because I think the landowner doesn't understand timber harvest.
Yeah.
They think a nice, healthy woods is, has these scattering of big giant oaks and there's no understory. It looks like a park, and that's what a wood should look like. And that is not what a wood should look like. Harvesting timber is no different than harvesting corn. When it's mature, it's time to harvest. If you don't, it goes to waste. So you might as well harvest it. I think a lot of it's the expectations of the landowner. They don't. I mean, how many times in a lifetime does anyone really have a timber harvested?
Right.
Most people might do it one time, and they're expecting something totally different than what ends up happening. The other thing is, I don't think a lot of people really understand what good whitetail habitat looks like.
Exactly.
And that's that regrowth, or that second growth, or whatever you want to call it, the regeneration of the forest after logging is done. That really thick native cover, native woody vegetation is ideal. And it's much more beneficial to wildlife than a mature timber is.
So just to clarify, before we get all the hate mail from the loggers out there, we're not saying loggers are shady. We're saying that there's a perception out there, because a lot of times you guys don't get on the same page as what the landowner is either expecting, because even they don't know. So getting people involved that gets down to the nitty-gritty plan is what we're getting at. It's not saying, there might be a perception that they are, but there's great guys that run great businesses out there.
Absolutely.
That they just don't, whatever the landowner thinks they want isn't what they tell you want, and it starts out bad from the beginning.
I've got multiple good loggers that I recommend.
Yeah.
So it's not like they're non-existent. There's some really great ones out there, along with a few shady ones.
Yeah.
But I think the big thing really is people don't understand, because more than once I've been to a client's property and they'll have a mature woods with all kinds of nice big oaks. And I'll say, you need to have a logger come in here and devastate this woods. Everyone see these big, long, these giant straight oaks that don't have a branch on them for 30 feet. You need to have every one of them cut and taken out of here.
Right.
And they look at me like I'm nuts, and they say, "Are you kidding me? I'm never going to get my wife talked into this." Well, that's a problem I can't help you with.
Right.
But if you want to improve the habitat, those trees need to be removed. It's time for the harvest.
So my second question will be easier, but you referenced after that property is logged to go in there and cut the non-valued trees. That would also be the time in that winter time to start pushing up and making your travel corridors like we did here on your home farm when we dropped a bunch. But that'd be if you could get a skid loader or a tractor in there and start making those pathways when everything's dropped before that canopy comes, because then inside of that area you can start funneling deer to a specific plan where you're going to hunt them in a pinch point.
Absolutely. Great point. You want to do all this. You want that timber guy to come in as soon as hunting season's over and as quick as he can get that timber harvest done. Then you immediately want to get in there with your chainsaw and your buddies and their chainsaws, and you want to just level them junk trees. And then before it greens up in the spring, you want to plan. You want to create deer travel corridors through that, and you want to bring those deer to specific points past your tree stands, but it needs to be very a well thought out plan where you're taking the wind into consideration, where those deer naturally want to go, where your food sources are,
and how you can get in and out.
Exactly, and you can direct those deer out of that 40 acres or however big it is. It doesn't matter how big it is. You can direct those deer out of that thick bedding area, the sanctuary, if you will. You can lead them right where you want them as they come out. And those are the kind of projects that turn a good property into a great property. And my friend Brian Kraft with Midwest Land Group has a saying that more properties have been ruined by following bad advice than anything else. And this is a perfect example that, things have got to be done with a purpose. You don't just go out there and start whacking and stacking trees. It's all with a purpose. It's all part of a grand plan.
Right. And that's get a buck within 30 yards or
exactly
where you want to be.
Get him to live in the middle of that 40-acre thicket you just created, but when he does decide to stand up and move in daylight hours, you want him moving right past your tree stand.
Right. All right, that's my last question on that one.
All right, well, I hope we answered your question, Natalie. If not, just fire away an email or something and see if we can do better. Have a free Chasing Giants shirt coming your way for submitting that question. So our next one is from Joseph Jansen of Sauk Center, I hope I'm saying that right, Minnesota. This is a much shorter question. Joseph says, in your experience, will mature 5-plus-year-old bucks avoid areas once they see a trail camera? Have you ever seen a mature buck walk around a certain spot to avoid a camera? Absolutely. Absolutely they will. That does not mean every buck will. So, one thing that frustrates me about social media is I'll post something on there, and some guy will get on there and he'll argue and he'll tell me it's wrong because he's seen a buck do something different. Whenever I'm giving you advice, I'm teaching you how to kill the toughest mature buck in the woods, because if you can kill the tough ones, the easy ones will be very simple. So there is definitely bucks that avoid trail cameras. I've seen it with my own eyes that bucks that absolutely, instead of walking through a gate, a wide open gate where every deer in the woods is just walked through, a mature buck, and there's a trail camera at that gate, a mature buck refuses, and he'll jump the fence 20 yards away rather than go through that open gate just because he knows there's a camera there. Witnessed that with my own eyes. Terry mentioned a buck that I'm watching that I get his picture about one time at a location. That's it. And he looks right at that camera and he's gone. You can just see his eyes. He's looking right at that camera, and that's the only time you get his picture, and he's gone. Now, sure, there's going to be bucks that you get
Trump
their picture.
was like that, wasn't he?
He was.
Trump
Absolutely
was like that.
And he's not the only one that I've seen that way. And then there's other bucks that you get their picture at the same spot
They're
day
putting
after
on a
day
show for
after
you.
day. And 20 pictures today, 30 tomorrow, 10 the next day, and they don't seem to care. But if you need to focus your efforts, and you need to your hunting approach needs to be with the idea of killing the toughest buck in the woods, because if you can kill the toughest buck in the woods, the other ones start coming pretty easy. And the advice that we share here, there's going to be exceptions to the rule, no matter what that rule is. But if you can kill the tough ones, if you follow the rules to kill the tough ones, the other ones are going to come easy.
So to increase our chances of getting a picture of the toughest buck to kill, what's some ideas to do it? Hang your camera high and point it down?
That's part of it. And the other thing is don't have your camera facing straight down that trail where the buck is coming at it, and he's walking right at that camera facing it. So in other words, if that camera is to the side of the trail and he's crossing it, so you're getting a broadside picture of that deer rather than a face-on picture of that deer, he's a lot less likely to see it.
Around a corner, an
Yep.
inside corner, something that you can, it's not eye-to-eye contact.
And keeping human scent to a minimum around that camera. The buck's walking along and he smells human scent. What's he going to do? He's going to lock up. He's going to lock up and he's going to analyze that situation. He's going to start looking around. He's going to start sniffing. And he's going to stand there for a couple minutes, and eventually he's going to see that camera, and if he's one of those kind of bucks, that's when he's going to bug out. So, there's a lot of cameras that I check on my four-wheeler without ever leaving the seat of my four-wheeler. I drive right up to it, and I never leave my scent on the ground. There's others where I'm planning, I come up to the back of that tree, slip around and change the card in that camera, and I never step where I'm expecting that buck to step just to keep my scent down. You just got to be as stealthy as possible when you're talking about mature bucks, because some of them are pretty tough customers, and those are the ones that if you can kill them, you can kill any of them.
Right. That's a great point. Good question.
Yep, for sure. So, Joseph, you'll be getting a free Chasing Giant shirt as well.
Sounds good.
Yep. What else you got, Terry?
I'm ready to hunt. About the next time we're going to be on a podcast, it's going to be close to opening day for me.
Yep. You're going to get a chance about 3 weeks before I do because your season opens sooner. And I could go hunt the Ohio opener, which, what is it? It's the end of September, isn't it? Last Saturday in September, I believe.
Yeah, something like that.
But I don't have pictures of a buck in Ohio that I would even want to shoot at this point. So if that don't happen, I'm certainly not going to drive over there to shoot a buck smaller than what I'm looking for. So.
Yep. So, we appreciate everybody's feedback, support. Again, the last episode was just baffling how many people were engaged in it. I mean, we had a lot of downloads, but there was a lot of people engaged in it. So, hopefully my rants don't get too awful frequent, but.
It wasn't bad tonight.
Yeah, it
wasn't bad at all.
There'll be for everybody who complains, send me your address and I'll send you a free zip tie. How about that?
Well, whatever it takes. Whatever it takes.
Zip ties are a whole lot cheaper than buy and sell cameras to test for everybody. So
they're a whole lot cheaper than T-shirts to send people.
Yeah, there you go. So, but we do appreciate everybody's support. We appreciate our sponsors, especially buyafarm.com. And, as we get closer to deer season, I know people are going to be more engaged as we start talking a little bit more specifically about the bucks that we are getting on camera and maybe targeting. And it'll get to the point we probably will start doing them more frequently as we get in the field. So right now, we've been trying every 10, 12, 14 days. Depending on how our schedules lay out, but it'll get to the point we're doing them much more frequently during the season so we can try to communicate what we're seeing in the field. So hang around with us, and we appreciate you guys listening and sharing. So make sure you go to Higgins Outdoors YouTube channel. Do we got any videos coming up here?
We got a video that'll be released really quick in the next day or so. It's going to be on rope scrapes.
Oh, there you go.
I've had a lot of questions submitted about rope scrapes. And if that video had been released, I was going to use some of them questions, but it wasn't quite ready yet. But the next couple days or so, that rope scrape video, and something really interesting about this, when you see that video on the Higgins Outdoors YouTube channel, we went in and on my property and we actually hung a rope and went through every step in the process to do that. Now, here about the 1st of September or so, I'm going to put a trail camera on that rope scrape. And we're going to see, and I'm going to post pictures on my social media, my Facebook page, from that camera on that rope scrape. We're going to see how many different bucks we get on that one rope scrape in the course of a season. And I'll bet you'll be shocked at how many different bucks hit that rope scrape.
Yeah, so for especially the people who live in states where they can't use mineral or supplement or attraction for inventory, this is a very, very effective way to get a picture of about every buck on the property, and not to mention hunt over it.
Right.
Have a stand close to where they're going to be checking it. So
I bet you I'll throw out a prediction here. Well, for one thing, and I mentioned it in the video. You're gonna see this, but I like to hang those ropes in the wintertime and give them about 6 or 8 months before we go in and put the scent on. Give them time for the rain and everything to wash all the scent off that rope. I have not had really good luck hanging those ropes right before or during season. That fresh rope just holds too much scent. However, we got this. We filmed this probably over a month ago. So by the 1st of September, that rope is going to have been out there almost 2 months. By the time we put the camera on it and everything, and I'm hoping that's long enough that the bucks are hitting, and I'm pretty sure they will.
Did you have the rope in a tree for months?
Yeah, it was hanging outside.
It wasn't like you went into Rural King and bought a rope and took it to the woods.
Right.
You had it already hanging up, getting it ready out in the yard in a tree somewhere.
Yeah, but you need to watch that video on the Higgins Outdoors YouTube channel, and we'd appreciate it if you would subscribe to that channel while you're there. But then also follow the Higgins Outdoors Facebook page, because throughout the course of the entire hunting season, I'm going to post pictures of different bucks on that rope scrape that you see me making the video, and we're just going to see how many different bucks hit that rope scrape.
That'll be cool.
Yep, for sure.
All right. Well, thanks for listening to this episode. And as Don takes us out with thanking all of our partners, please again leave some feedback, rank our podcast on the network that you're listening it to, and then like Higgins Outdoors YouTube channel and share them with your friends. We appreciate your support.
All right, thanks for listening, everyone. We want to also thank our sponsors, BuyAFarm.com, 360 Hunting Blinds, Quiet Cat Bikes, Real World Wildlife Products, Vortex Optics, Lone Wolf Tree Stands, and Matthews Archery. See you next time.
Thanks to all the zip tie manufacturers.